This is a Dirshu Mishnah Berurah as we begin a new Siman Yud Aleph, and today we're going to learn Sif Aleph, and we'll begin Sif Beis up until the Ramah of V'Noyagin. And the title of the Siman, again, the title is written by the Beis Yosef Kaira himself. Dinei Chutei HaTzitzis. These are the laws of the Chutim, the strings of the Tzitzis, which is going to encompass not only the length, not only if they become basal, but how you make them. And what's important to mention, actually, by way of Akdama, is there's three stages in the process of creating a string, the process of creating tzitzis. We have something called the tviyah, which is the spinning, which is really stage number 2. We have something called the nipot, which is the combing, which is stage number 1. And then we have the shizur, which is the spinning. So again, we have the nipot, which is the combing of the raw wool. Then we have the tviyos, we spin that raw wool into fibers. And then we have the intertwining, when you take the thread and you spin it into what we have as a thread. We'll get a better picture, but basically all your tzitzis, if you ever looked, are really composed of numerous little strands. We'll just pull it apart here so that everyone can see, even though, as we'll see in a moment, it's very important to stay together. I don't know if you could see that, but as you can see, I'm really pulling it apart. That's one string is made of multiple strands. So we'll get there. And of course, we'll see some pictures as we go along. Let's begin the Mechaber. It says the Mechaber, Achutin Sarach Shiyu Tviyon Lishma. The spinning, when it goes from the raw wool into the first strand, that has to be done Lishma, with intent for the mitzvah of tzitzis. Says the Rama, V'yesh machmirin afilu linapsan lishma. There are some that are stringent even to comb it lishma with intent. V'aminag la'acha b'nipos, and the minag is to be mekel. So stage number 2, the spinning from the raw wool into the string, that needs to be sarich. It needs to be the combing. Samar machmir, says the Rama, the minag is to be mekel. And what does it mean to do a lishma? Continues the Mechaber, sheyoymar b'tchilas, you should say at the beginning as we turn over the page of Ativoy, Shuoisekin l'shem tzitzis, that as you're spinning, you should say that you're doing it for the sake of the mitzvah of tzitzis. Or what else should you say? Shemer leisha, you should say to the woman who is spinning the wool, Tavli li tzitzis l'talis, spin for me tzitzis for atalas. Ve'em lo yayat fuyon lishma, Sulin, it is possible. So stage number 2, when it goes from the raw wool into the spinning process, that is an absolute requirement, says the Mechaber, to be lishma. Before we even go further, let's understand by looking at these two beautiful pictures, courtesy of the Mishnah Berurah Pe'er Halacha, as you see over here on the top, is a Maisa Tviyah, as you see it's going from the raw wool, and you're spinning it into a thread, and here you see is the nipot, is the combing, as it shows you that before you comb out all the fibers, it's a very dark ichi, and after you comb it, you see on the comb is left all the blemished parts, we could call it, and then you have the raw wool. Here's another picture, as you see the Maisa Tviyah, the act of spinning from the raw wool. And just by way of introduction, this is the shizur, is when you're taking multiple threads and you're spinning it into one string. So let's go into straight the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sivkatan Aleph Achutin, the strands, Loshen HaRambam, Ha'amoitzi Chutei Tzitzis Bashok, you find tzitzis, you find strings in the marketplace, Afilu Psukim, Ushzurim, they're caught and they're spun, so it looks like good tzitzis strings, says the Rambam, Psulim. Why? The Tarach Chutin Kein tzitzis are those that make strands similar to tzitzis, but they're not made lishma with intent. Vim Kein Shemelonatzis l'shem tzitzis, maybe it was not made with the right intent. V'amagid Mishnah Chaylek v'Kami Kesef Mishnah, which by the way was written by Rav Yosef Kaira himself. Kasav the Rambam b'tshuva chazer b'yachar doesn't argue on the Rambam. He says the Rambam himself retracted. I can't lashon Amagid Avram. V'agrav v'bir Simon Shanal Kasav the Adinim Rambam Kemosh Barishayna, Ayin Shabs. If a massive machloikas, what is the status if you find tzitzis in the shok? The Rambam says it's possible. Magen Mishnah argues. Kesef Mishnah says Rambam is chayzer. The Goyin says no, the Rambam was not chayzer. And that is halacha number 1. Halacha number 2 has to be tevuin lishma, as we saw it as to be spun from the raw wool into the strands lishma vu dvar tayra din midaraisa, which of course is extremely important. As we're going to proceed into the Ishir, we're going to see different scenarios in which we want to know, is this lishma or not? Realize we're discussing a biblical commandment, a din min ha-tayra. T'chsev gedilim ta'as l'cha yishamik. Gedilim for yourself, l'shem chayvach. When it says ta'as l'cha, should have kavanah, intent for the obligation. Said the Ramah, there are those that are mekel beniputs in the combing. Demad t'chsev ta'as l'cha, hainu mitviyah ve'elach. That when does the pasuk refer and require l'shma intent from the tviyah, from the spinning and onward, but the combing, which is before the spinning, does not require intent. Shazi ikar asiyas agdilim. That is the main part. Find beprisha b'shem aral mi prag. Look in the priest in the name of the Rami Brag Shemaskim del Chatchila Yesh Lahachmer Lenabitz Lishma. One should be machmer, and this is a chumrah. When one is looking for a chumrah, you go to buy tzitzis. We're learning of tzitzis. Many people have a good feeling now. They want to go and upgrade their level of tzitzis. A beautiful thing. We'll get more into the schar and latter simin. So one of the chumras is a niputz lishma. You have to ask for it. Usually they have to take the tzitzis. They have to make it specially for you. They don't come that way. The niputz lishma means it was kom lishma. It's actually quite costly. The strings themselves sometimes can be somewhat about $20-$30 in addition to the $20 baguette. So it's a bit expensive, but of course mitzvahs don't cost money. And it's a beautiful as we're seeing, the Mishnah Berurah teaches us that there's a chumrah that one should do, like the lechatchila of the Ramah. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot and Dalit, what is lishma? Shayomer, you should say beferish. You should say it with your mouth explicitly, like the machshava b'alma. Not that you just think it. Va'afilu, and says Mishnah Berurah, not only should you not just think of lechatchila, va'afilu b'di'evet zarchini ma'ani machshava. Says Mishnah Berurah, I'm not sure. We have to look into the matter. If you just thought it doesn't work, b'di'avad, if you already did, I Lamed Beis, Sivches, V'yotetz, V'chlush, V'kivei Yersham, Ayin Sham. Says Mishmur, B'tzchilas, when should you say that you're doing l'shem mitzvah tzitzis? In the beginning when you make it. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot V'dai Bazah Filu Yom Ha'achara, when you start off the process and you start a lishma, works even for the next day. This Tamasu lishma koi. Once it starts lishma, it remains lishma. The Chola'is al das Rishayna Isaac, as you continue doing it, you're doing it with the intent that you had originally. Says the Mishnah Berurah, as we turn over the page, unless after you say explicitly it's not lishma, but if you start a lishma, it continues lishma. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot and Vav, that what are you saying? You're saying that Taviyah, of course, I don't believe any of us are ever going to have this. This is when they're spinning from that raw wool into the strands. You should say that the Tivoy Sha'isik in L'Shem Tzitzis Ve'im Tava Ma'at. Let's say you spun a little bit. And then you say L'Shem Mitzvah again. Remember, we're playing with Gedilim Tasilcha, Din Da'araisa, that the strings have to be spun Lishma. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if you start off Shalai Lishma, without intent, and afterwards you said you want a L'Shem Mitzvah, Lo Imahani L'Mashanitva Kvar, the original part does not work. Why does it not work, says the Mishnah Berurah? Because that which you said now, which be Lishma, we're not sure what does that mean. Does it mean does it show you that the whole time you want a lishma or not? Says Mishnah Berurah, therefore it does not work. Now, says Mishnah Berurah, we can make a nice siruf, a nice combination. Let's say you started off with thought. You thought it to be lishma, which the Mishnah Berurah just taught us. He's not sure if it's good. But then, you just didn't say it explicitly. Then, afterwards you said it explicitly. Then, in that case, it's Mishnah Berurah near Li Dish L'Sadi this specs fake. What's the specs fake? So Dirshu explains it. We'll just speak it out right now. Actually, we could open up straight to the Dirshu note number 10, in which he explains that what is the specs fake. That actually he does not say what the specs fake is. That I thought Dirshu explains what the specs fake is. No, he does not explain what the Sfek Sveika is. He just teaches other dinim of Sfek Sveika. Says you could. It sounds over here you can make a bracha on the Sfek Sveika. He asks from later on, and then he says, okay, let's just explain what the Sfek Sveika. The Sfek Sveika is, Mishnah Berurah himself just taught us, we're not sure. does machshava work? Suffix number one. And even if machshava does not work, when you said afterwards that you want to do l'shem mitzvahs tzitzis, we're not sure, is that a gilui milsalim afred? Does that show you retroactively that the whole time that you wanted it lishma? So we have two sveikas. On two sveikas says the Mishnah Berurah we could be mekel, and that's what Dirshu here is pointing out. What here it sounds like you'd be mekel, keep make a bracha on those tzitzis. And how that fits with latter simanim we'll leave for now. Continues the Mishnah Berurah, she'emer leisha. The Machaber said that you tell the woman that's spinning the strings that you want it to be done lishma. She'emer leisha, says Mishnah Berurah Sikot and Zayin rota leimar betchilas atvia levad at the beginning. If a woman says, and now we're starting to understand what is lishma, what does it mean intent? Does it mean that you have to have an obligation? Does it mean you have to be a male? Does it mean you have to be a gadol? Says Mishnah Berurah, if you tell a woman it's enough, number one. Number two, if she says on her own, I did it lishma, that works. She is an amana, she's believed to say that. A guy, a cherish, a shaita, or a katan are not believed. Now says Mishnah Berurah, unfortunately a very common application. We have someone who's unfortunately went off the derech, he's a mummer, he's not keeping shemer Torah mitzvahs, but he did it l'teyavon. He didn't do it in spite God, he did it, unfortunately, he got pulled by his taivos, he got pulled by the street, he got pulled by Aveiros. Says Mishnah Berurah, she'ein matur las tzitzis b'bigdai, and he himself doesn't wear tzitzis. Still, mutter letvos, he can spin the strings. He's believed if he says did lishma. And certainly says Mishnah Berurah, if he's over only on other aviros, not on tzitzis l'teyavayin, certainly he is believed about this. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if someone does it in spite God, and certainly it's not going to work. If he wants to do it lishma, it's not going to work. Let's take Sif Beis, then we'll see some Dirshu. Says the Mechaber Sif Beis, Tava Nachri, continuing our theme of lishma. What if a guy spun the strings? The Jew is standing there and saying to do a lishma. La Rambam, also La Rosh Kasher, it's machlokes Rambam and the Rosh, whether it's going to be kasher or not. Says the Mishnah Berurah over here, Sivkat and Ches, Avi Gelulim, Utvias Chersh. When you have a child, if they're doing it and he's Israel standing and saying, do a l'shem mitzvah, whether that works, he says she's plucked up as that's machlokes. Discusses this. Very important. It's only if the tviyah of the spinning is not such a long process. Then we could have learned that the Gadol, the Yisrael, standing there and saying it to do a l'shem mitzvah is enough. It takes a long time to spin the strings. Even the rush is going to be masking, it doesn't work. If you tell the guy to do a l'shma, because he's going to forget. If he stopped, then he started again to spin, it's not going to work. Only if it's a short amount of time. That he did it for his own reason and it's going to be possible. What's the machlokes that the Rambam here says it's possible, the Rosh says it's kasher. Rambam is possible, says Mishnah Berurah, if gotten good. What is this far of the Rambam? Svira law. The Akam Davi Galilim Adaitan Avshei Avid did it for his own reason. The fact that there's a Jew saying l'shem mitzvahs tzitzis, do it for the mitzvah, the guy doesn't care. He's doing it for himself. But the Rosh kasher b'shas adzchak paskins the Mishnah Berurah. Kshein la Yisrael sheyitzveu l'shma. You don't have a Jew to do it, and you need to make tzitzis. Yesh lismach al zeh paskins Mishnah Berurah. You can be saimech on the Rosh. But without the Yisrael al gabav, you cannot. Kiber agra kasav shavdas ataisa mordechai gamkin karambam. So he's only going to be mekel of the Yisrael al gabav. First of all, let's see over here. First of all, this is the nipot. This is the combing of the wool. Here's the raw wool. And just here's a bunch of nice pictures. As you see on the right side, that is the raw wool. The left side is how they're going to spin it all together. And that's really going to be more tomorrow. Let's go now and let's see a few dirshus before we call it a day. So says the dirshu over here, Says the Dirshu over here, note number 11. Mumar Latei Avain, says the Dirshu, an interesting detail. If you have in front of you Isser and Heter, and you choose the Isser, usually that shows you that you're doing Lahachis. Because if they're both right in front of you, what's the big Taiva? Just do the Heter. But says the Dirshu over here, but it's not true when it comes to Tzitzis, quoting a Berurah later on, because maybe there's other reasons why, and of course we hear all the excuses, unfortunately, people say they're uncomfortable and it's annoying, etc. So the fact that he chose to wear the beged without tzitzis is not going to be a raya that he's called a mumar lehachis. Continues the Dirshu, note number 13, that let's say a Jew began it, says the Chazon Ish, then the guy can continue it because in Stama it's going to be lishma. That is the Chazon Ish over here. One more Dirshu, note number 15. Very, very important Dirshu. It's really in the spirit. We're getting close to Pesach. The whole tumult, whether you could use machine matzahs, you should use machine matzahs. Some say it's better to use it for the Seder because the most kosher, there's no chametz. Others say it's missing in the lishma. So over here is where it all comes from. Says, everyone click this Dirshu number 15 carefully. Says, pause the screen and you can learn it properly. Says the Chazon Ish. Everyone says, oh, the Chazon Ish is machmer. No, it depends on what halacha. Says the Chazon Ish with regard to making tzitzis by a machine. If it's done in the beginning, the Yid presses the button, that makes it into lishma because he pressed the button that continues and saves to the Achiezer. Says the same thing. B'shem the Chesed LaAvram. Comes on the Minchas Yitzchak and he deals with this extensively. And he says there's another concern that it might stop, there might be a power outage, might be other issues. Okay, and then the Arletzion says it's no good. We've seen Abba Shaul, and he concludes over here that even the Chazon Ish holds only for one string. And by the way, this is a very common, it might not be so common in the spinning of the strings, but it's even more common in the making of the tzitzis, as we're going to get to. There are those who make them by machine, and a lot of the very, very cheap tzitzis is done that way. If you look on the Hechsher, it usually says it, but again, the Chazon Ish holds that it is mutter and definitely what to be semech on, and we'll pick it up from here in the next year. V'siyata d'ishmaya.